Joe, was just announced by the University of Florida and AD Scott Strickland that Billy Napier, the head coach of the Florida Gators, is going to be returning. He's been on the hot seat for quite a while now, but and what might be one of the more shocking bits of news is today that it's announced that Billy Napier is going to be returning at Florida. Your thoughts?
I'm a little bit conflicted here because on one side, one of the things that we've discussed with this Florida job is that they have been very quick to pull the rug out from underneath coaches before they can really get their stride going, before they can really build a roster. I think from that just general philosophy, it's good for Florida that they're allowing for Billy Napier to build and develop the young group of guys that he's had in the past recruiting cycles. But I'm not going to steal your however, but I can't justify this. I just can't. They have been inconsistent. They have been gradually getting worse. They make in-game mistakes on a constant basis. It feels like this is being granted to them because they've played close in a couple of games against teams that they could have quite possibly beaten. Like, are we handing this out to Billy Napier because they played Florida kind of close with a third-string quarterback and they went to overtime with Tennessee? It just doesn't really feel like Napier is in this trajectory like other programs that were down bad that brought in new coaches that improved on a year-to-year basis. It feels odd. It does not feel like something that's going to net massive results in year 4.
Well, I mean, look, I get the premise of not going like I don't want to say they're trying to Mike Norvell because in year 3, Mike Norvell won 10 games here, but not coming off of somebody with a schedule like that. And maybe you're right, Joe. Maybe that, this whole time they're saying, well, look, are we going to put our new head coach and then pay a buyout for Billy, pay a buyout for a new head coach to come in here with that type of schedule? Maybe it makes some sense in that development. But no year 1 head coach with the schedule that Florida was going to play is going to be judged based off of that. None of it. Nobody was going to judge a year 1 head coach if you're facing 7 top 10 ranked opponents. Nobody was going to do that to you. Here's the truth. I don't think Florida's a serious program right now.
No.
At all. You can't convince me. Now, Billy might be able to turn it around. Maybe they get to a winning season. But what is the goal at the University of Florida? It's national championships. It's not being what Billy Napier has been. Like, this is a flat-out joke. And any Florida fan that is okay with it, and by the way, I see a lot of them on Twitter that are okay with it. Why are you okay with it? Oh, our administration stinks. Oh, Scott Strickland. Who gives a shit? This is the biggest joke for an administration to allow this to happen. This is probably what did happen. You want to know what probably happened? They looked and they probably started asking around to other coaches and agents about what was going on. And what did Lane Kiffin say?
Well, and I also think part of it too is the commitment to Strickland, and Strickland brought in Billy Napier. So it's kind of like going down with the ship. And if you're Strickland, you're putting a bit of a bet on Napier. If you go and hire somebody who has to take over this roster, and presumably Lagway and a number of the young talented players on this team would probably hop in the portal. You bring in Lane Kiffin.
You can't worry about Lagway. I'm so tired of that argument.
No, I know, but like this is why it's all ridiculous, is that like that feels like what the premise and the decision was here. And you brought up the schedule. It feels like that this is being handed to Billy Napier to continue to work on off of like an assumption. Like they had a really difficult schedule. So we just have to assume that they would have done better if the roster was better and if they were more competitive against the teams on their schedule, or if the schedule was easier.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say next year's schedule is going to be hard too. And I don't think that they are in this position unless they try to go full Florida State and be super aggressive in the portal, which we know that there's mixed results with that. I can't be convinced that they're suddenly going to be a 10-2 football team next year. That's what the goal should be if you're going to bring back Napier. If they're not 10-2 next season, it's an utter failure.
No, it's not failure. You want me to tell you why? Because he's got to get to a winning season. A winning season is is a massive progress for them. Joe, he's 15-18 at Florida. So to say that they can go 10-2 next year is it's not possible.
I'm not saying that they can. I'm saying that like that's what Florida should be aspiring for, and I don't even think that's on the table for them.
No, hell no, it's not on the table.
Right.
Allowing DJ Lagway, we don't want him going in the portal. That is the biggest load of BS because you got to rebuild so many other areas. Now, here's what I think is happening too. I can tell, and we talked about this in the recap of Florida and Georgia, okay? I can tell that the players really love being around him. I can tell that the players really are bought into him. I can see all that. And we talked about this with Sam Pittman. Want to know why Sam Pittman didn't get fired last year? Mainly due to the fact because he's a good guy. Billy's a good guy, and good guys don't get fired. But the bottom line in all of this is, I mean, Joe, I look at a place like Florida and think to myself, you're on the path of what Tennessee was after the years of Philip Fulmer. I mean, you're on that exact path. You fired Dan Mullen. Oh, well, recruiting was bad. He literally had just gotten to an SEC championship game. Literally. And now you're allowing a coach that doesn't have a winning season. Now, here's where they're going to come back. This is the strength of schedule for Billy Napier at Florida. You ready? In year one, he had the 7th toughest strength of schedule. In year 2, he had the 4th toughest strength of schedule. Right now, he's at 7th. So the strength of record, it's even worse or tougher to overcome that. And I understand that they're not as bad as most people make them out to be. But let me just ask the God's honest question: why do you have to make this decision now? What happens if they get blown out against Texas? What happens if they lose to LSU?
Or Florida State.
God forbid they lose to Florida State. But you're still going to be 5-7 in that scenario.
I would just
– by the way, you got Ole Miss in there too. So the God's honest truth is there's a strong likelihood in these 2 seasons that you're 10-14. So why do you have to make that decision now? Why couldn't you have waited?
Right. Well, I agree with what you're saying, and this is me playing devil's advocate, and I understand the opposite side of this. One quick quip to throw in there. If you do lose to Florida State, this needs to be revisited. Like you need to fire Billy Napier if you lose to Florida State. That's a pathetic loss. I'm sorry, Florida State fans, that you're catching a stray here, but we all know that is a very pathetic loss. If the whole pitch is that Billy Napier is showing signs of improvement and competitiveness, and they look more competent on a week-by-week basis, or whatever the description could be placed there. But the devil's advocate to your point is that you need to place this into the minds of recruits now, and you need to set up a trajectory for Napier to have runway, to have his best recruiting class and also his best transfer portal haul. That's what's going to net the results that we're talking about here. In order for them to get to, their goal needs to be 10-2. They need to get to a playoff next year. Like, that needs to be the goal. In order for them to do that, they need to finish in the top 10 or higher in high school recruiting, which they were doing really well last year and then lost a couple of guys. And it felt like maybe some of that was
guys.
Well, they lost a number of important recruits, and it felt like maybe part of that could have been some negative recruiting.
They went from the number 1 spot to out of the top 10.
Right. So they had a complete huge drop-off, and there was even speculation that DJ Lagway could flip last second. They were able to retain him, which felt like maybe that was the last saving grace. So for this upcoming cycle, you need to finish top 10. You need to have a really good group of young players that a couple are ready to contribute, kind of like what South Carolina is doing right now. And then last part with that is you need to dominate in the portal. You don't need to completely rebuild your roster through the portal, but you have to do at the same level of what Lane Kiffin did, where he brought in some key important defenders that elevated the level of defensive performance. So that's my only devil's advocate there.
I got to massively push back on that. They're 51st in the country in recruiting rankings right now. 51st.
Well, so I would argue though,
hold on.
Okay.
You cannot sell on me recruiting when you fired Dan Mullen.
But wouldn't opposing coaches be using that against him? And
they are using it against him right
Sorry,
now.
I was going to say we know that they are using it against him, that there's uncertainty about his job.
Recruiting, portal, it doesn't matter. You got to give him at least $20 million to sustain a portal roster and go and get players. That's what you're going to have to do. If you think he's the guy, high school recruiting is not where you're going to get it right now. There's nobody on their board. Vernell Brown, Ben Hanks, Jalen Wiggins, none of those guys. The receiver in Vernell Brown III, okay, teams are already trying to flip him. Joe, it's going to get worse because this is what's going to happen, just like it did last year. The November slate of getting your ass whipped. That's what's going to happen here. It's going to continue to get worse. Now, I don't know if this has a play in it or yes or no. Maybe somebody that covers the team can tell us. Does the Jaden Rashada case have anything to do with this?
In what facet?
Well, because both of you are getting sued, and you don't want to fire Billy Napier and then him take a stand and throw you vastly underneath the bus.
That's a good point. I don't know if I want to really truly unpack that because it's complicated, but you're right. You're right. It's an interesting point.
I can unpack it in 2 minutes. You ready?
Okay.
This is a cover-up by Florida because I've been in that. I've been in law over a decade. Yeah. Okay, this is what was going to happen. They were scared that if this went to court, that Billy Napier, after being fired, would go up on stand and say, yep, they said they were going to give this kid all this money. At the last minute, they backed out. That's what Florida's worried about because Florida as an administration backed off on that. The bottom line is you don't have a direction. Now, Joe, if they were where they were last year in recruiting and they're in the top 10, I'd be like, look, man, I mean, they are playing – the reason they're playing close against all these ranked opponents is because they are recruiting well. They're 51st in the country in recruiting rankings, 51st. And you're going and now you're trying to sit here. I mean, I could do this all day. I go to 2024. Let's go to that one very quickly. They were 13th in the country. They were 6th in the portal, but 13th in the country. It fell off from number 1. I look at 2026. Joe, they're 16th right now, but they don't have a top 150 kid committed. So you can make all of these judgments about Billy. You're proving to everybody in the SEC that you're not a serious program. And I like Billy as a person. I thought this is coming off a game too, by the way, where Billy called his best game arguably ever against Georgia.
Yeah.
Joe, this is a joke. To all you Florida fans that are going to come in here and say it makes sense, let me stop you right now. It doesn't. Because listen, let me tell you what programs do that are serious about it. Ed Orgeron at LSU won a national title and within 18 months got fired. A national title. You're a program that's built on greatness. And I can't wait for Steve Spurrier's comments. He already's throwing Billy under the bus. This is a flat-out joke.
Final thought on this, and you already said this. There very clearly is a lack of direction here, and it's insane. You mentioned Dan Mullen, and I get that Dan Mullen's last year was not, it really started to tail off. But to fire a coach who actually was winning, has a down period, gets to an SEC championship game, was one of the few coaches since Urban Meyer that has gotten you to an SEC championship game. You fired him, but give more runway to a coach who hasn't put together, let's forget the wins for a second. There have been some close matchups that they've played, but they have consistently been an incompetent product. Guys run out with the wrong jerseys, guys, messing up on special teams. It's all completely painted with the misfire on a short snap on a field goal attempt. That was a complete game changer when you might have possibly had George on the ropes if you kept running the ball the way that you were, but the game got completely thrown away by that. Lack of execution on a special teams operation is one of the simplest things for success for a football program. Coming from a former Division I long snapper, I can tell you that is an indictment on a program's lack of attention to detail. I don't know how you can justify this, and you're 100% right. And, we keep saying the same thing here, but it doesn't make sense. And I doubt that Billy Napier suddenly turns this thing around. No, I bet they go 8-4 next year, and then there's going to be a lot of apologizing by people that support Napier.
I mean, even if he goes 8-4, I mean, like that means
my
nothing
point.
to me. Think about this. Last thing for me. Dan
Okay.
Mullen had a better SEC overall record than what Billy has as an overall record. Meaning, Dan Mullen was 21-14. Okay, against SEC opponents. He has he has the same amount of losses as Billy has wins. Like, think about that for a minute. Like that is insane. By the way, last thing too. Dan Mullen went to a Peach Bowl, an Orange Bowl, and a Cotton Bowl in his first 3 years.
The side-by-side comparison gets crazier and crazier the more that you bring it up, because I don't think a lot of people contextualize this, but the comments are going to be, well, Dan wasn't getting it done in recruiting, and he didn't get along with the
Billy
administration.
With the 51st recruiting class, number one recruiting class.
Right.
By the way, Joe, just throwing this out there, last thing, I swear to God. That's why Miami and people making fun of Miami, when you go and get a dude like Cristobal.
And at least Miami got better on a year-to-year basis. That's my whole point with this. He took over a Miami program that had some good players, but was quite shaky. That roster was quite shaky. It was not built for success in the ACC.
They got to fire Scott Strickland. That's how I'm getting in here. They got to fire Scott Strickland. There it is. All right.
Perfect.
See y'all soon. Peace.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.